Hello everybody, my name's Paul Edmondson. I'm Head of Research for the Shakespeare Birthplace Trust, and I'm here in the grounds of Anne Hathaway's cottage to talk about a new book, Imagining Shakespeare's Wife.
I'm Katherine Scheil from the University of Minnesota.
Katherine, congratulations on your book. Why did you want to write this account of Anne Hathaway?
I was interested in trying to figure out who the real Anne Hathaway was, and then I discovered there are actually dozens and dozens of Annes, which was quite a surprise.
And also that she'd been very neglected.
Yes, the pieces about her life have been selectively used, embellished, expanded, and of course neglected in order to create particular Annes.
What do we know about the real Anne?
We don't know much about the real Anne. We know her death date, the beautiful epitaph on her grave that describes her as a devout mother. We know she was married to Shakespeare for 34 years, and they had 3 children together.
And that she lived on the site behind us,
Yes.
in the house behind us,
Yes,
which itself is, I guess, iconic now.
yes,
Anne has played an important part in her story,
yes.
her afterlife.
So the Anne Hathaway's cottage, which we see here, is one of the centerpieces of her afterlife. And of course, it's a beautiful space, ideal for imagining her romantic relationship with Shakespeare.
What surprised you most when writing this book?
I would say 2 things. So first, that the first imaginary Anne Hathaway came not from a novelist or poet or playwright, but from a teenage boy.
Who was that?
This is William Henry Ireland, who is famous for doing the Ireland forgeries. So he forged a number of items related to Anne, a fake love letter from William to Anne with a lock of William's hair, a better will where she gets 180 pounds, I think a gray velvet suit, rings, and a portrait.
And when was he writing?
So that's in the late 1790s.
So that tells us something for a start, doesn't it, about her status then? Why was he producing those things, would you say?
Well, it was in part to satisfy his father, who came here to Stratford in search of relics, didn't quite find exactly what he wanted, but his son was able to identify the desire for some kind of documentation about Shakespeare's relationship with his wife. So that's what he produced, was this love letter that testified to Shakespeare's affection.
And he was believed by some.
Believed by many, exposed by 18th-century editor Edmund Malone.
This was a great demolition job on Malone's part.
Malone, I'm sure, was quite delighted to do away with this idea of a romantic courtship between William and Anne.
Well, generations continue to love that courtship and visit the cottage behind us. What is it about the afterlife of Anne that especially attracts you?
I think it's the potential to imagine who Anne was. And since we know so little about the real Anne, it opens up a space to fill in what she might have been like, which can reflect the desires of readers and audiences for what they would like to see in a romantic counterpart to Shakespeare.
Just going to glance back to the main entrance there and just imagine standing in that space, Mary Baker. Tell us
Yes.
about Mary Baker. She has an important part in this story.
Yes.
Who was she?
So Mary Baker was the long-serving final relative of the Hathaway family who lived here, led tours of the house for probably 50 or 60 years, including guests like Charles Dickens, Mark Twain, Ulysses S. Grant, Oliver Wendell Holmes.
And they would stay over, wouldn't they? They'd sleep in the cottage.
There was the opportunity to stay over for select individuals. And her tour involved having a drink from the well, sitting on the courting settle and imagining that you were William or Anne, looking through the Hathaway family Bible, which told the lineage of how Anne was related to Mary Baker. And then you would leave with a souvenir flower from the garden.
And some people posted those flowers and herbs overseas, didn't they?
Yes, and bring them back home as souvenirs.
So in thinking about the afterlife of Anne Shakespeare, Anne Hathaway, she's more commonly known.
Yes.
It's also a way of thinking about the rise of the pilgrimage industry, if you like,
Yes.
the tourist industry around these great lives,
Yes.
and people's ongoing hunger to find out as much as possible about William and Anne.
Yes.
Well, I'd love to hear more about that story and that afterlife. So why don't we go along to the Willow Cabin and talk some more.
Great.
In the spirit of the afterlife of Anne Hathaway, we're in the Willow Cabin, "Make me a willow cabin at your gate," those lines from Twelfth Night. And we're going to be talking now about the afterlife of Anne Shakespeare in fiction especially. As you were saying a moment ago, Catherine, it's an afterlife which stretches over several centuries,
Yes.
from the early 18th century and continues through our own. And there are two just examples, because the book is full of wonderfully rich detail about this afterlife. There are two examples I wanted to perhaps talk about. One from 1870.
Right. So this is by Harriet Beecher Stowe, The True Life of Mrs. Shakespeare. And the story that Harriet Beecher Stowe tells is that Anne is a devoted wife to her husband, William, and only on her deathbed does she reveal his secret, which is that the way he's become a successful playwright is that he invites rival playwrights back to his country home here in Stratford, murders them, buries them underneath the mulberry tree so that he's the dominant playwright of the age. Anne has been his accomplice in all of this, and only on her deathbed does she reveal that that's the true story.
I mean, it's delightfully far-fetched and gripping, I'm sure,
Yes.
for its time.
Must have been shocking in 1870.
And it was Harriet Beecher Stowe, and she visited the cottage and enjoyed
Yes.
coming to Stratford.
Very much.
But it's most revealing, perhaps, because it's about a confessional Anne.
Right.
About Anne with secrets.
Right.
And that's a trope, isn't it, through these fictions of her afterlife?
Yes, the later novel, this is the 2010 novel by Arliss Ryan called The Secret Confessions of Anne Shakespeare, is a similar work, although much, much later. So the story of this novel is Anne is on, it opens with Anne on her deathbed talking to granddaughter Elizabeth, and she confesses that Anne is the real author of Shakespeare's plays, and that early on he left her with her 3 small children to go to London and become a playwright. She was first angry, and then she decided to have her revenge. So she follows him covertly to London, becomes the playwright that he was never able to become, and she never gets the fame and fortune that he did, of course, because she was a woman, but she's really the brains behind the Shakespeare canon.
Now, the afterlife of Anne Shakespeare has not always been as positive as you've just illustrated with these two
Right.
examples. I mean, there's
Right.
been a lot of disparagement over time, hasn't there?
Yes.
And I think what's fascinating about this whole project is just the variety, the ways in which people have used her life to promote their own ideals, their own political agenda. And you write very interestingly about women-centred Annes, two
Yes.
examples of which we've just heard.
Yes.
Yeah.
For every positive Anne, there's an equally negative Anne, and the converse as well.
So the women-centred Annes, when would that have started in the afterlife?
Really the late 19th century, when
Yes.
you have quite a variety of women readers interested in Anne and readers more interested in the women of Shakespeare's plays.
2023 sees the 400th anniversary of the death of Anne Shakespeare. How do you think we should be approaching that anniversary?
Well, I think it would be a good start to more prominently commemorate Anne with the beautiful epitaph on her grave in Holy Trinity Church, written from the point of view of a child to a mother, probably done by daughter Susanna. And it's one of the most reliable pieces of evidence about Anne's life, dating from just 11 years after her death.
Well, there's a translation of the Latin in your book. Would you read it for us, please?
Sure.
Thank you.
Mother, you gave me the breast, you gave me milk and life. Woe is me, that for so great a gift my return will be but a tomb. Would that the good angel would roll away the stone from its mouth, and that your form, like the body of Christ, would come forth. Yet my prayers are of no avail. Come quickly, Christ, that my mother, though shut in the tomb, may rise again and seek the stars.
That's an extraordinary invitation, isn't it, to
Yes.
consider her afterlife religiously, grounded here, of course, in the epitaph, but overwhelmingly demonstrated culturally in the pages of this book. And it's an afterlife that will continue.
Yes,
Katherine Scheil, thanks very much indeed.
my pleasure.